The schoolhouse was burning. 3 children were trapped inside and no one could reach them. Emma didn't think. She ran straight into the flames. Behind her, the wealthy Boston widow who had come to take her child away grabbed a stone and smashed the window. Together they crawled through smoke and fire. Only one of them would walk out as a mother. But let me tell you how it all began. 1 month from now, she would stand before Judge Harrison Blackwell and fight for the right to keep a child who shared none of her blood. She would face the wealthiest woman in Boston and refuse to back down. She would learn what it meant to be a mother not through birth, but through choice. But right now, Emma Sullivan was just a 24-year-old woman stepping off a stagecoach in a town called Millbrook, Colorado Territory, and not a single soul had come to meet her. The stagecoach had rattled for 3 days straight, shaking her bones until she forgot what stillness felt like. Her fingers ached from gripping the worn leather seat. Her back screamed from the endless jolts and bumps of the mountain roads. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the letter pressed against her chest, tucked safely inside the pocket of her coat. The letter that had promised her everything. William Crawford had written with such warmth, such hope. He described a small cabin nestled in the Colorado mountains, a piece of land that needed a woman's touch, a future built on hard work and honest love. He wrote about wanting a partner, someone to share the quiet mornings and the long winters. Someone who understood that life out west wasn't easy, but it was real. Emma had believed every word. She believed because believing was all she had left. The stagecoach jerked to a final stop, and dust rose like smoke around the wooden wheels. The driver shouted that this was the end of the line, that anyone heading further would need to find their own way. Emma gathered her single bag, the one that held everything she owned in the world, and stepped down onto the platform. The mountain air hit her like a wall of ice. It smelled of pine and wood smoke so different from the coal dust and factory fumes of Chicago. The sky above was impossibly blue, stretching endlessly between peaks that rose like ancient stone giants. Beautiful, terrifying, vast. Emma had never seen mountains before. She had never felt so small. The platform was nearly empty. A tired mother sat on a bench with 2 restless children tugging at her skirt. An old man with a newspaper too large for his thin hands squinted at the pages, muttering to himself. No one else. No brown-haired man with kind eyes waiting with flowers. No husband rushing forward to greet his bride. Emma smoothed her blue dress, the best one she owned, the only one that still made her feel like someone worth marrying. She had saved it for this moment, had kept it folded carefully at the top of her bag, so it wouldn't wrinkle. But 3 days on a stagecoach had left their mark anyway. Dust stained the hem. The fabric was creased in places she couldn't fix. She tried not to think about what William would see when he looked at her. If he looked at her. If he came at all. She waited. Minutes passed. The mother gathered her children and disappeared down the street. The old man turned another page of his newspaper. The wind picked up, carrying the sound of a distant horse and the creak of wooden signs swinging above storefronts. Still no one came. Emma's heart began to sink slowly at first, then faster, like a stone dropped into deep water. She told herself there must be an explanation. Perhaps William was delayed. Perhaps he was tending to an emergency on his land. Perhaps the letter with her arrival date had been lost in the mail. But the doubt crept in anyway, cold and familiar. She approached the old man, carefully clutching her bag with both hands. "Excuse me, sir." She kept her voice steady, though it wanted to shake. "Do you know a man named William Crawford?" The old man lowered his newspaper slowly. His face was weathered, lined with decades of sun and wind and hard living. But it was his expression that made Emma's stomach drop. Pity, clear and unmistakable pity. He folded the newspaper with heavy hands, taking his time, as if he wished he didn't have to answer. "You just missed him, miss." "Missed him?" Emma's voice came out, smaller than she intended. "He was here, no. I mean," the old man sighed. "Tom Crawford left town near 3 weeks ago. Packed up in the middle of the night. Didn't tell nobody where he was heading." The world tilted beneath Emma's feet. She felt the wooden platform sway, though she knew it wasn't moving. Her fingers went numb against the handle of her bag. "Left, he left, afraid so." The old man's voice was gentle now, like he was delivering news of a death. "Owed near half the town money. Folks figured running off was easier than paying up." Emma couldn't breathe. The letter in her pocket, the one she had read so many times, the edges had softened, the one filled with promises of a cabin and a future and a life together, suddenly felt like a stone crushing her chest. 3 days on a stagecoach. Every penny she had saved from years of factory work. Every hope she had allowed herself to feel since the day she read his advertisement in the newspaper. All of it for nothing. She gripped her bag, tight her knuckles white, trying to hold herself together. She would not cry in front of this stranger. She would not collapse on this platform in a town that meant nothing to her. She was Emma Sullivan. She had survived the orphanage. She had survived the factories. She would survive this too. But God, it was hard. A woman approached, moving with the careful steps of someone carrying too much weight. She was perhaps 35, with kind eyes set in a tired face and a belly rounded with pregnancy beneath her plain dress. 4 children of various ages trailed behind her, and Emma wondered how anyone could manage so many while expecting another. "You must be the mail-order bride Tom talked about." It wasn't a question. The woman's voice held no judgment, only a weary understanding that suggested she had seen too much of life to be surprised by its cruelties. Emma nodded, though her throat felt too tight for words. "I'm Martha Hendricks." The woman shifted the basket on her arm. "My husband's the blacksmith here in Millbrook. I figured you might show up sooner or later. Tom was always talking about the woman coming from Chicago showing off that photograph you sent." Emma remembered the photograph. She had paid a week's wages to have it taken at a studio near her boarding house. In it, she looked serious and proper. Her hair pinned up carefully, her face arranged into what she hoped was an expression of competence and grace. She wondered what William had thought when he looked at it. She wondered if he had laughed. "Well," Martha continued, "you can't stand here all day. Come on, I'll take you to Tom's cabin, see if you can make sense of things." Emma wanted to refuse. She wanted to turn around and climb back onto the stagecoach and ride all the way back to Chicago, back to the familiar streets and the smoke-stained buildings and the life she understood. But there was nothing to go back to. The factory had closed. Her boarding house had given her room to someone else. The city that had been her home for 12 years had no place for her anymore. So she followed Martha Hendricks down the main street of Millbrook, past the saloon, where men's laughter spilled through swinging doors, past a little white church with its simple wooden cross, past Henderson's general store, where a bell chimed and as someone entered. The mountains rose all around them like walls, beautiful and indifferent to her suffering. "What can you tell me about William?" Emma asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Martha glanced at her sideways, then returned her attention to the uneven road. "Tom came to Millbrook about 2 years back, told everyone he was going to be a rancher, make something of himself out here in the territory. He had a way of talking, made you believe him, made you want to help." Emma knew, she had felt it in every word of his letters, that warmth, that sincerity, that sense that he was speaking directly to her heart. Truth was, Martha continued, he didn't have much more than a falling-down cabin and a few chickens. But he borrowed money from near everyone in town, said he just needed a little help getting started, said he'd pay it all back once his first crop came in, or his cattle sold, or some other story that never quite came true. The street gave way to a narrow path that led into the trees. The town disappeared behind them, swallowed by pines that grew thick and tall. Somewhere nearby, a creek rushed over stones, and the sound was so clean, so pure, that Emma felt tears prick her eyes despite everything. "What happened to him?" she asked. "Nobody knows for sure." Martha's voice was matter of fact, the voice of a woman who had long since learned not to waste emotion on things she couldn't change. "One morning he was just gone. Took his horse, took what little he had worth taking, and vanished. Some folks think he headed to California. Others say Mexico. Either way, he left a lot of people holding empty promises." The path grew narrower. The trees pressed closer. Emma could smell damp earth and pine needles and something else, something cold and clean that she would later learn to recognize as mountain snow melting somewhere high above. "There was a woman, wasn't there?" Emma heard herself ask. "Another woman before me." Martha stopped walking. She turned to face Emma fully, and there was something in her expression now, something heavier than pity. "Ruth. Her name was Ruth. She came about a year ago, same as you. Mail-order bride. Pretty thing, young, full of hope." Emma's stomach clenched. "What happened to her?" "She got pregnant, had the baby, then caught a fever 2 weeks after giving birth." Martha's voice dropped. Childbed fever, the doctor called it. She was gone within days. Emma closed her eyes. The trees swayed overhead and the wind sounded like morning. Tom tried to take care of the baby for a while, Martha continued, but he wasn't any good at it. Kept leaving the little one with neighbors, with me, with anyone who'd take him. And then when Tom ran off, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The cabin appeared through the trees like something from a nightmare. It was small, smaller than Emma had imagined, and it leaned to one side as if exhausted from the effort of standing. The roof sagged in the middle. The windows were dark. The whole structure seemed to sog under the weight of abandonment. Martha pushed the door open. It wasn't locked. There was nothing inside worth stealing. The smell hit Emma first. Stale air and sour whiskey and something else, something animal and neglected. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness, and what she saw made her chest ache with a complicated mix of anger and sadness. Clothes lay scattered across the floor. Dirty dishes filled a basin near the cold fireplace. Empty whiskey bottles lined the table like soldiers standing at attention. The bed in the corner was unmade blankets, twisted and stained as if someone had left in the middle of a troubled sleep and never returned. This was what William Crawford had promised her. This was the future he had described in letters full of hope and warmth. A falling down cabin, an abandoned life, the scattered remains of a man who had never intended to keep a single promise he made. Emma stepped further inside her boots, loud on the warped wooden floor. She saw a small table with a single chair, a fireplace black with old ash, a shelf with a few tins of food, most of them rusted, and on the table, barely visible in the dim light, a small wooden horse carved with care, clearly made for a child's hands. Someone had loved someone here once. The thought came unbidden, and it brought fresh tears to Emma's eyes. Then she heard it, a sound so soft, so faint that at first she thought she had imagined it. A cry, weak and fragile, barely more than a whimper coming from the darkest corner of the room. Emma's heart stopped. She moved toward the sound without thinking, her body responding before her mind could catch up. The corner was shadowed, hidden behind a stack of crates and old blankets. But as she drew closer, she saw it. A wooden box, the kind used to transport apples from the general store. Inside, lined with thin sheets and torn fabric, lay a baby. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The child was small, perhaps 6 or 7 months old, with wisps of brown hair and skin that looked too pale, too thin. His eyes were open, and they were the most startling shade of blue Emma had ever seen. Blue like the Colorado sky, blue like deep water, blue like something ancient and knowing. He looked at her without blinking, as if he had been waiting for someone, as if he had known she was coming all along. "Whose baby is this?" Emma's voice came out as a whisper. Martha moved to stand beside her, and there was guilt written across her face now. The guilt of someone who had kept a secret they weren't sure how to share. "That's what Tom didn't tell you in his letters, I expect. That baby, he's William's boy." Emma's knees nearly gave out. She reached for the edge of the table to steady herself. "William has a child. Had a woman here last year." Martha's voice was quiet, gentle. "Ruth, like I said, she passed away after giving birth. The fever took her fast. Tom tried for a while, but he wasn't any good at caring for a baby. Always leaving little Samuel with neighbors, with me, with anyone who'd take him for a few hours. And when Tom ran off," she trailed off, but Emma understood. "When Tom ran off, he had left the baby here, alone, abandoned in a wooden box in a cold cabin in the middle of the Colorado wilderness. Samuel." The name hit Emma like a physical blow. She knelt beside the wooden box, and the baby reached out, curling his tiny fingers around her own. His grip was small, but sure, determined, as if he had made a decision that she hadn't yet understood. "He's about 6 or 7 months old," Martha said. "I've been coming by to feed him, bring milk when I can. But I've got 4 children of my own and another on the way. I can't keep doing it forever." Emma lifted the baby gently. He was lighter than she expected, far lighter than a child his age should be. She could feel his ribs through the thin fabric of his clothes. She could see the hollows in his cheeks, the signs of meals missed and care neglected. But when she held him against her chest, he pressed his cheek to her shoulder and sighed a sound so small and trusting that something inside her shifted in a way she couldn't name. "What will happen to him?" she whispered. "There's an orphanage in Denver." Martha's voice was careful, measured. "Or maybe someone in town will take him. But most folks are already struggling. Times are hard. Another mouth to feed is a lot to ask. Orphanage. The word cut through Emma like a blade of ice. She knew what an orphanage was. She had grown up in one. St. Mary's Home for Foundlings in Chicago, where the beds were lined up in rows, and the blankets were never warm enough, and the meals were thin soup and stale bread more often than not. Where she had lain awake at night year after year wondering if anyone would ever come for her, if anyone would ever look at her and say, yes, this one. This is the child I choose. No one ever had. Emma had aged out of the system at 16, released into the world with nothing but the clothes on her back and a vague recommendation for factory work. She had survived. She had worked 14-hour days at the textile mill, breathing in cotton dust until her lungs ached, saving every penny she could. She had dreamed of something more, something better, someone to belong to. And now here she was, 24 years old, standing in an abandoned cabin in the mountains, holding a baby who had no one in the world. She looked down at Samuel. He looked back at her with those impossible blue eyes, and she saw herself reflected there. Not her face, but her story, her loneliness, her desperate hope for something more than survival. Maybe she hadn't come here to find a husband after all. Maybe she had come here to find him. Night fell quickly in the mountains. One moment the sky was gold and pink, and the next it was black, pierced only by more stars than Emma had ever seen. The cold crept in through every crack in the cabin walls, and she built a fire with wood she found stacked near the door, grateful that William had at least left that much behind. Martha had gone home to her own children, promising to return in the morning with more supplies. She had left a small amount of milk, barely enough for a few feedings and instructions on how to warm it and how to coax the baby to drink from a cloth dipped in the liquid. It was primitive, it was desperate, but it was all they had. Emma fed Samuel slowly, carefully, watching his small throat work as he swallowed. He drank greedily at first, then slowed, then finally fell asleep in her arms with milk still glistening on his tiny lips. She didn't put him down. She sat in the single chair beside the fire, holding him against her chest, listening to the crackle of flames and the whisper of wind through the pines. The cabin was cold and dirty, and nothing like the home William had promised. But with the baby warm against her heart, it didn't feel quite so empty. Emma thought about her options. She could leave. She could take the next stagecoach back to Denver, then on to Chicago and try to start over somehow. Perhaps another factory would hire her. Perhaps she could find a room in a boarding house, save money again. Begin again the slow crawl toward a life that was merely bearable rather than good. But what about Samuel? She looked down at him, sleeping at the gentle rise and fall of his small chest, at the perfect curve of his cheek. He had no one. His mother was dead. His father had abandoned him. The only family he might have were strangers who might or might not take him in, or an orphanage in Denver where he would learn, as Emma had learned, what it meant to be unwanted. She couldn't do it. She couldn't walk away from this child the way everyone else had walked away from her. The realization settled into her bones like warmth from the fire. It wasn't rational. It wasn't practical. She had no money, no job, no place to live, except this falling down cabin that didn't even belong to her. She had no legal right to this child, no claim that would hold up in any court. She was a stranger, a mail-order bride who had arrived too late to a wedding that was never going to happen. But none of that mattered. Samuel stirred in her arms, his small fingers curling against her dress. He made a sound, not quite a cry, more like a question, a wondering whether she was still there. Emma pressed her lips to the top of his head and breathed in the scent of him, baby, and milk, and something else. Something that smelled like hope. I will stay with you, she whispered into the darkness. I don't know how. I don't know what comes next. But I will not leave you alone. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains. The fire crackled and popped. Somewhere far away, a wolf called to its pack, and the sound echoed off the stone peaks like a song of survival. Emma held Samuel closer and began to hum a lullaby, something half remembered from before the orphanage, from a time when she had a mother who sang to her. The melody was simple, barely more than a handful of notes, but it seemed to comfort them both. She didn't sleep that night. Every few hours, Samuel woke crying, and she warmed more milk and fed him, rocking him gently until he settled again. By morning, her eyes burned with exhaustion, and her arms ached from holding him, but she felt something else too. Something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Purpose. The sun rose slowly over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Emma carried Samuel to the window and showed him the light, though she knew he was too young to understand. Look, she said softly, that's a new day. Our first day together. Samuel blinked at the brightness, then turned his face into her shoulder, seeking the comfort of her warmth. Emma smiled, the first real smile she had allowed herself since stepping off the stagecoach. Martha arrived mid-morning with a basket of supplies, flour and salt, and a few jars of preserved vegetables. A bundle of baby clothes worn soft from use by other children, a small tin of milk from her own cow. Behind her came her husband, a broad-shouldered man with gentle eyes, who carried firewood without being asked and stacked it neatly by the door. "You'll need more than this to get through winter," Martha said, setting the basket on the table. "But it's a start. I don't know how to thank you," Emma replied. Martha waved her hand dismissively. "We help each other out here. That's how it works. That's how we survive." She watched Emma hold Samuel, and something softened in her expression. "You're good with him," she observed. "Natural, like you've been doing this your whole life." Emma shook her head. "I don't know anything about babies. Nobody does until they have one." Martha smiled. "And then you learn. You learn because you have to, because someone is depending on you to figure it out." Later that day, after Martha and her husband had gone, Emma began to clean the cabin. She scrubbed the floor until her hands were raw. She washed the dishes and threw out the empty whiskey bottles. She made the bed with fresh linens Martha had brought and arranged the baby clothes in a neat pile on the table. It wasn't much. The cabin was still falling apart, still cold, still barely fit for habitation. But when Emma stood in the center of the room and looked around, it felt different. It felt like the beginning of something. Samuel watched her from his wooden box, now lined with soft blankets, in position near the fireplace where the warmth could reach him. His blue eyes followed her movements, and every now and then he made a sound, a coo or a gurgle, as if offering his commentary on her progress. "What do you think?" Emma asked him, gesturing around the room. "Is it fit for a prince like you?" Samuel waved his tiny fists and kicked his feet, and Emma chose to interpret that as approval. She found other things as she cleaned. A woman's hairbrush with a few strands of dark hair still caught in the bristles. A pressed flower tucked between the pages of a Bible. A small embroidered handkerchief with the letter R stitched in the corner. "Ruth?" Emma held the handkerchief for a long moment, running her thumb over the delicate needlework. Ruth had been here. Ruth had lived in this cabin, had slept in that bed, had looked out these windows at these same mountains. Ruth had loved and hoped and dreamed, and then she had died, leaving behind only these small traces of her existence. And a son. She had left behind a son. Emma looked at Samuel, and she made a silent promise to the woman who had come before her. "I will take care of him," she said quietly. "I will love him the way you would have loved him. I will make sure he knows that he was wanted." The handkerchief went into Emma's pocket, pressed close to her heart, where William's lying letters had once rested. That afternoon, a knock came at the cabin door. Emma opened it to find a man she hadn't seen before. He was tall and thin, with dark hair going gray at the temples and eyes the color of storm clouds. He carried a leather bag in one hand and stood with the careful posture of someone accustomed to entering homes where he wasn't certain of his welcome. "Miss Sullivan," his voice was low and measured. "Yes, I'm Dr. Elijah Garrett. Martha Hendricks asked me to come check on the baby." Emma stepped aside to let him enter, suddenly conscious of her appearance. Her dress was wrinkled from sleeping in the chair. Her hair had come loose from its pins. She probably looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had lost everything and found something unexpected in the ruins. But the doctor didn't seem to notice. His attention went immediately to Samuel, and he crossed the room with long strides, setting his bag on the table and kneeling beside the wooden box. Emma watched him work. He examined Samuel with careful hands, checking his ears and eyes and mouth, listening to his chest pressing gently on his belly. His movements were practiced and precise, but there was something else there too. A gentleness that seemed at odds with his reserved demeanor. She noticed his hands, long fingers meant for delicate work, and on his right hand a scar, pale and raised, running from his wrist to the base of his thumb. She wondered how he had gotten it, and she didn't ask. "The baby is underweight," the doctor said finally, still not looking at Emma. "Signs of inadequate nutrition and possibly dehydration. But no obvious illness, no fever. With proper feeding and care, he should recover." Relief flooded through Emma, so intense she had to grip the edge of the table to stay upright. "He'll be all right." Dr. Garrett stood and turned to face her for the first time. His eyes met hers, and she saw something there, something familiar. Pain carefully hidden, loneliness carefully guarded. the look of someone who had learned to keep the world at a distance. "He'll be all right," he confirmed, "if he's cared for properly." He opened his vial and removed a small bottle and a jar of something Emma didn't recognize. "This is a tonic," he explained, setting them on the table. "Give him a few drops each day with his milk. It will help with the nutritional deficiency. And this is a salve for his skin. He has a mild rash that should clear up with treatment." Emma nodded, trying to remember everything he was telling her. Dr. Garrett hesitated. Then almost reluctantly, he spoke again. "Martha tells me you came here to marry William Crawford." Emma's face warmed with embarrassment. "I did, and he left before you arrived." "Yes." The doctor was quiet for a moment, as if weighing whether to say what came next. "William Crawford was not a good man." His voice was flat without judgment. "He borrowed money he never intended to repay. He made promises he never intended to keep. He left a trail of disappointment everywhere he went." Emma said nothing. What was there to say? Dr. Garrett reached into his bag again and withdrew an envelope worn and creased as if it had been handled many times. "I found this in the saloon," he said, "in a box of things William left behind when he ran. I thought you should see it." Emma took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter written in a woman's careful script. She scanned the contents quickly, and her heart sank further with each word. The letter was from a woman named Eleanor Price from Kansas. She wrote about receiving William's advertisement, about sending him $200 for travel expenses, about her plans to arrive in Colorado in the spring to begin their life together. The letter was dated 8 months ago. There were others, Dr. Garrett said. At least 2 more women that I know of. Ruth was one of them. He paused. William Crawford made a practice of this, finding desperate women, promising them futures, taking their money. You weren't the first. You likely weren't meant to be the last. Emma stared at the letter in her hands. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Not tears of sadness for herself, but tears of rage for all the women William had deceived. For Ruth, who had died in this cabin. For Eleanor, whose fate was unknown. For herself, who had come so far only to find nothing but lies. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice rough. Dr. Garrett met her eyes again, and this time she saw something else there. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. "Because you should know what kind of man you are dealing with," he said. "And because you should know that staying here trying to raise that child will not be easy. There are people who will judge you for it. There are obstacles you cannot yet imagine." He picked up his bag and moved toward the door. "But for what it's worth," he added, pausing on the threshold, "I think you're doing the right thing. That baby needs someone. And from what I can see, you need him too." He left before Emma could respond. She stood in the doorway and watched him walk down the path until the trees swallowed him, and she was alone again with Samuel and her thoughts and the letter from Eleanor Price still clutched in her hand. That night, after Samuel was fed and sleeping, Emma sat by the fire and thought about everything she had learned. William Crawford was worse than she had imagined. He wasn't just a man who had abandoned her. He was a predator, a schemer who had targeted vulnerable women and exploited their desperation for his own gain. Ruth had been one of his victims. Eleanor was another. Emma herself was a third. How many others were there? How many women had sent their savings to a stranger in Colorado only to find emptiness at the end of their journey? She thought about Dr. Garrett's words. "Staying here will not be easy. There are obstacles you cannot yet imagine." She knew he was right. She had no legal claim to Samuel, no money, no family, no standing in this community. She was a stranger from Chicago, a mail-order bride who had arrived to find her groom had fled, a woman without a husband or a home or anything to offer except her own 2 hands and her stubborn refusal to give up. But she had survived the orphanage. She had survived the factories. She had survived 3 days on a stagecoach and the discovery that everything she had hoped for was built on lies. She would survive this too. Emma looked at Samuel sleeping peacefully in his box by the fire. His small face was relaxed, his breathing steady. He had no idea what his future held, no understanding of the precarious situation they were both in. He only knew that someone was here, someone was holding him, someone was keeping him warm and fed and safe. That was enough for now. It would have to be. Emma leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes, listening to the fire crackle and the wind whisper through the pines. Tomorrow she would figure out how to make this work. Tomorrow she would find a way to earn money to secure her position to protect this child she had only just found. But tonight she would rest. She didn't know that 2,000 miles away in a mansion in Boston, a woman with ice blue eyes was reading a telegram about her brother William. She didn't know that this woman had already hired investigators, had already learned about Ruth, and the baby had already made her decision. She didn't know that Victoria Crawford Ashford was coming. And when she arrived, everything would change. Emma woke before dawn to the sound of Samuel crying. She lifted him from his box and held him close, feeling his small body tremble with hunger, or cold, or both. She warmed the milk Martha had left, dipped a cloth in the liquid, and let him suck until his cries faded to contented sounds. "This is our life now," she said softly, watching the first gray light of morning creep through the windows. "You and me against the world." Samuel looked up at her with those remarkable blue eyes, and Emma could have sworn she saw understanding there. Trust. Hope. She thought about the wooden horse on the table carved with such care by hands she would never know. She thought about the embroidered handkerchief in her pocket, stitched with love, by a woman who had died too young. She thought about all the broken promises and shattered dreams that had led her to this moment, this cabin, this child. And she made a decision. She would not let Samuel grow up in an orphanage. She would not let him know the loneliness she had known, the endless waiting for someone who never came. She would fight for him with everything she had, even if she had almost nothing. Because that was what mothers did. And whether she had given birth to him or not, whether she had any legal right to call him her own or not, Emma Sullivan had become a mother the moment she lifted that baby from his wooden box and held him against her heart. She looked out the window at the mountains rising pink and gold in the morning light. Somewhere out there, a woman with power and money and lawyers was making plans. Somewhere out there, a storm was gathering that would test everything Emma believed about herself. But she didn't know that yet. For now, there was only the warmth of the fire, the weight of the baby in her arms, and the quiet hope that somehow, some way, everything would be all right. The days that followed took on a rhythm that Emma had not expected. She woke before sunrise to feed Samuel, then spent the mornings cleaning and organizing the cabin until it resembled something closer to a home. In the afternoons, Martha would visit with supplies and advice, and sometimes other women from town would come too curious about the stranger who had chosen to stay. They brought gifts: a warm blanket knitted by Mrs. Henderson from the general store, a rocking chair that had belonged to someone's grandmother, jars of preserved fruit and vegetables that would help Emma survive the coming winter. Each offering came with stories and warnings and the quiet acceptance that Emma was now part of Millbrook, whether she had planned to be or not. Samuel grew stronger every day. The hollows in his cheeks began to fill out. His cries became louder, more insistent, the cries of a baby who expected to be heard and answered. He smiled for the first time on the fifth day, a gummy, toothless grin that made Emma's heart feel like it might burst. She talked to him constantly. She told him about Chicago, about the factories and the boarding houses and the crowded streets where nobody knew your name. She told him about the orphanage, about the cold beds and the thin soup, and the way she used to lie awake at night, imagining a family that would come for her. She told him about his mother Ruth, about the handkerchief with the embroidered R that Emma now kept in her pocket always. "I never knew her," Emma would say, "but I think she must have loved you very much. I think she would have been a wonderful mother if she had been given the chance." Samuel would watch her with those ocean blue eyes, and Emma would wonder what he understood. Probably nothing. He was only a baby after all. But she liked to think that somewhere deep in his small heart, he knew he was not alone anymore. Dr. Elijah Garrett came by every few days to check on Samuel's progress. He never stayed long. He examined the baby with his careful hands, asked Emma a few questions about feeding and sleeping, then packed up his bag and left without much conversation. But Emma began to notice things about him. She noticed that he always arrived with more than just his medical supplies. A loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, a jar of honey, a bundle of firewood left silently by the door. He never mentioned these gifts. He never waited to be thanked. But they appeared anyway as reliably as the sunrise. She noticed the way he held Samuel during examinations with a gentleness that seemed practiced, as if he had done this many times before. She noticed the way his eyes sometimes went distant, as if he was looking at something far away that no one else could see. She noticed the scar on his hand and the way he would unconsciously run his thumb along it when he was thinking. And she noticed his daughter. Lily Garrett appeared at the cabin on the 8th day, a whirlwind of golden curls and gray eyes that matched her father's. She was 4 years old, small for her age, but bursting with energy, and she had apparently heard about the baby from Mrs. Henderson at the general store. Is it true there's a baby here? She stood in the doorway, bouncing on her toes, too excited to wait for a proper invitation. Can I see him? What's his name? Does he have hair? My friend Sarah's baby brother doesn't have any hair at all, and he looks like a potato. Emma couldn't help but laugh. The sound surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed. His name is Samuel, she said, stepping aside to let Lily enter. And yes, he has hair. Just a little bit. Lily rushed to the wooden box where Samuel lay watching the world with his solemn blue eyes. She peered down at him with the intensity of a scientist examining a specimen. He's very small, she announced. Will he get bigger? Yes. Emma knelt beside her. He'll grow a little every day. Before you know it, he'll be big enough to play with you. Lily's face lit up. Really, can I teach him things? I know lots of things. I know all my letters, and I can count to 50, and I know where babies come from. She paused, then added confidentially, they come from God. Emma smiled. That's right, they do. From that day forward, Lily became a regular visitor to the cabin. She would arrive in the afternoons after her morning lessons with the pastor's wife, full of stories about what she had learned and eager to share them with Samuel, who she had decided was her new best friend, despite his inability to respond. Dr. Garrett came to collect her one afternoon and found Emma sitting on the cabin steps watching Lily attempt to teach Samuel how to clap hands. The baby was too young to understand, but Lily didn't seem to mind. She clapped her own hands enthusiastically and narrated every movement as if Samuel were following along perfectly. She's been here every day this week, Dr. Garrett observed, standing a few feet away with his bag in hand. She's wonderful. Emma meant it. She makes Samuel smile. Dr. Garrett was quiet for a moment, watching his daughter. There was something in his expression that Emma couldn't quite read. Pride, certainly, but something else too. Something that looked like pain. Her mother used to say that Lily could make friends with a stone wall, he said finally. She never met a stranger in her life. Emma heard the past tense, used to say. She thought about Martha's words about the doctor being a widower, about how some wounds never fully healed. She sounds like she was a wonderful woman, Emma said carefully. She was. Dr. Garrett's voice was flat, controlled. She was everything good. He didn't elaborate. Emma didn't push. Some stories needed time to unfold on their own. Lily looked up and saw her father, Papa. She scrambled to her feet and ran to him, throwing her arms around his legs. Did you see I was teaching Samuel to clap? He's very smart, but his hands don't work right yet. Dr. Garrett bent down and lifted his daughter into his arms. His face softened in a way that Emma had not seen before, and she realized that this was who he really was underneath the reserve and the careful distance. A father who loved his child more than anything in the world. Time to go home, little one, he said. Miss Sullivan needs her rest, but I want to stay with Samuel tomorrow. Dr. Garrett set her down and took her hand. You can come back tomorrow. Lily pouted but didn't argue. She turned to wave at Emma. Goodbye, Miss Emma. Goodbye, Samuel. I'll teach you more things tomorrow. Emma waved back, watching them walk down the path until the trees swallowed them. The cabin felt emptier after they left, quieter in a way that pressed against her chest. She went inside and lifted Samuel from his box, holding him close. He made a sound something between a coo and a sigh and nestled against her shoulder. I think we're making friends, she told him. Real friends. People who might actually care what happens to us. Samuel responded by grabbing a fistful of her hair and tugging. Emma laughed and gently freed herself from his grip. I'll take that as agreement. The second week brought changes that Emma had not anticipated. Martha helped her find work at Henderson's general store, stocking shelves and keeping inventory, and helping customers find what they needed. The pay was modest, barely enough to cover the basics, but Mr. Henderson proved to be a surprisingly fair employer. He was a gruff man in his 60s with a beard that reached his chest and a permanent scowl that seemed carved into his face. But beneath the gruffness was a heart that understood hardship, and he allowed Emma to bring Samuel to work with her, setting up a makeshift cradle in the back room where the baby could sleep while she worked. I hate the sound of crying babies, he told her on her first day. But I hate rich folks from Boston even more. So if anyone comes asking about you or that child, you tell me first. Understood, Emma understood. She didn't know exactly what Mr. Henderson had against rich folks from Boston, but she was grateful for the protection, however unexpected. Working at the store gave Emma a window into Millbrook that she wouldn't have had otherwise. She learned who owed money and who paid on time. She learned which families were struggling and which were thriving. She learned the gossip, the grudges, the small kindnesses, and petty rivalries that made up the fabric of any small town. And she learned about Dr. Elijah Garrett. The women of Millbrook loved to talk, and they talked most of all about the handsome widowed doctor who had come to town 3 years ago with a toddler daughter and a past he never discussed. They talked about his wife Hannah, who had been beautiful and kind and beloved by everyone who knew her. They talked about how she had died of typhoid fever just 2 years after arriving in Millbrook, and how Dr. Garrett had not been the same since. He tried everything to save her. Mrs. Henderson confided one afternoon while Emma stacked cans of beans on the shelf. He was up for days trying every treatment he knew, but the fever was too strong. She passed on a Tuesday morning right as the sun was coming up. Emma thought about the scar on his hand. She thought about the distant look in his eyes. She thought about the way he held his daughter as if she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. He must have loved her very much, she said. Mrs. Henderson nodded. Still does, I reckon. Some loves don't fade even when the person is gone. That night after Samuel was asleep and the fire had burned down to embers, Emma sat in her rocking chair and thought about love. She had never experienced it herself, not the romantic kind. There had been no suitors at the orphanage, no opportunities for courtship in the factories. The closest she had come was William Crawford's letters, and those had been nothing but lies wrapped in pretty words. But she understood love now in a way she hadn't before. She understood it every time she looked at Samuel. Every time she held him, every time he smiled at her with that gummy grin that made her feel like the most important person in the world. This was love, fierce and unexpected and completely unconditional. She wondered if that was what Dr. Garrett had felt for his wife. She wondered if that was what Hannah had felt for him. She wondered why it made her chest ache to think about it. The next morning, Emma woke to find something unexpected outside her cabin door. A stack of firewood, freshly chopped and neatly arranged. She had not heard anyone arrive or depart. She had not heard the sound of an axe, but the wood was there, and it was exactly what she needed. She looked down the path, but there was no one in sight. The trees stood silent. The mountains rose indifferent against the pale morning sky. Emma carried the wood inside and added it to the pile by the fireplace. She didn't need to wonder who had left it. She already knew. Dr. Garrett came by that afternoon with Lily in tow. He examined Samuel as usual, noting the improvement in his weight and color, asking questions about his eating and sleeping patterns. But this time when he finished, he didn't immediately leave. Miss Sullivan, he said, still not quite meeting her eyes. There's something you should know. Emma tensed. In her experience, nothing good ever followed those words. I received a telegram yesterday, Dr. Garrett continued, from Denver. It seems that William Crawford's sister has been making inquiries about him, about his whereabouts and his circumstances, and he hesitated, and about any children he might have left behind. Emma's blood went cold. His sister, Victoria Crawford Ashford. Dr. Garrett's voice was flat, controlled. Wealthy widow from Boston. Her husband died 3 years ago and left her a considerable fortune. She has lawyers and investigators and enough money to make life very difficult for anyone who crosses her. Why would she care about William's child, Emma asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Because Victoria never had children of her own. Dr. Garrett finally met her eyes and she saw the warning there. Her son died when he was 2 years old. Diphtheria. And from what I understand, she never recovered from the loss. Emma pulled Samuel closer to her chest, an instinctive movement of protection. She wants him, Emma whispered. She wants to take him. I don't know what she wants. Dr. Garrett's voice softened. But I thought you should be prepared. If Victoria Crawford Ashford decides she has a claim to that child, she has the resources to pursue it. And you? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Emma understood. She was nobody. A mail-order bride from Chicago with no money, no family, no standing, against a wealthy widow from Boston with lawyers and investigators and endless resources, she would have no chance at all. What can I do? She asked, hating the desperation in her voice. Dr. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something she hadn't expected. I know a lawyer in Denver, Frederick Hayes. He's not rich or powerful, but he's honest. And he believes in doing what's right, not just what's profitable. Emma stared at him. Why would you help me? Dr. Garrett looked at Samuel, then at Emma, then away toward the window where the afternoon light was fading. Because that baby deserves a chance, he said. And because I know what it's like to lose someone you love. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. He picked up his bag and called for Lily, who came running from the corner where she had been showing Samuel a collection of leaves she had gathered. As they walked toward the door, Dr. Garrett paused and looked back. There's one more thing. His voice was quiet, meant only for her ears. William Crawford wasn't just a man who abandoned his obligations. He was a predator. He targeted vulnerable women, promised them futures, took their money. There were at least 3 others before you, maybe more. Emma thought about the letter from Eleanor Price still hidden in her drawer. I know, she said. I found the letters. Dr. Garrett nodded slowly. Then you know what kind of man he was, and you know that whatever comes next, you have nothing to be ashamed of. You were deceived. That's not your fault. He left before she could respond. Emma stood in the doorway and watched him and Lily disappear down the path, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Not the desperate hope of a woman with nothing left to lose, but something quieter and more sustainable. The hope that came from knowing she was not alone. That there were people in this town who might help her. That she had a chance, however small, to keep this child she had come to love. That night, Emma did something she had not done since leaving the orphanage. She prayed. She knelt beside Samuel's box, watching him sleep in the firelight, and she closed her eyes and spoke to a God she wasn't sure she believed in. I don't know if you're listening, she whispered. I don't know if you care about someone like me. But if you do, please help me. Please help me keep this child. Please give me the strength to fight for him. Samuel stirred in his sleep, making a soft sound that might have been a say or might have been an answer. Emma stayed on her knees until her legs ached and the fire burned low. Then she climbed into bed and slept better than she had in weeks, dreaming of nothing at all. The 3rd week brought the season's first real cold. Snow fell overnight, blanketing Millbrook in white and making the paths treacherous with ice. Emma learned to bank the fire before bed, to stuff rags in the gaps between the cabin's boards to keep Samuel bundled in layers even inside. She also learned that the people of Millbrook looked out for their own. Sheriff Daniel Cooper stopped by one morning with a wagon full of supplies that he said had been donated by various townspeople. There was flour and sugar and coffee blankets and candles and a small wood-burning stove that would be more efficient than the fireplace. When Emma tried to thank him, he just shrugged and said it was what neighbors did. Pastor Benjamin Moore came the next day with his wife, who brought a basket of fresh bread and a Bible that she pressed into Emma's hands with gentle insistence. The pastor didn't preach or lecture. He simply sat with Emma by the fire, listened to her story, and told her that she was welcome at Sunday services whenever she felt ready. Even Mr. Henderson, gruff and scowling as ever, gave Emma extra hours at the store so she could earn more money. He never mentioned why. He didn't have to. Lily came every afternoon without fail. She had taken to calling Samuel her little brother, a designation that neither Emma nor Dr. Garrett corrected. She would spend hours entertaining him with songs and stories and elaborate puppet shows using her fingers and a handkerchief. One afternoon, Lily arrived with a piece of paper clutched proudly in her hands. I drew our family, she announced, spreading the paper on the table for Emma to see. There were 5 figures sketched in a child's unsteady hand. A tall man with dark hair, a woman with brown hair holding a baby, a small girl with yellow curls, and standing slightly apart, a woman in a black dress. Who is this? Emma asked, pointing to the figure in black. That's Aunt Vic, Lily said matter-of-factly. She looks sad, so I put her in our family so she won't be lonely anymore. Emma stared at the drawing, not knowing what to say. From the mouth of a child, truth often came unbidden, and every few days, like clockwork, firewood would appear outside Emma's door. She never saw who left it. She never needed to ask. One afternoon, while Lily was playing with Samuel and Emma was mending a torn dress by the window, Dr. Garrett arrived with something other than his medical bag. It was a small wooden box, weathered and stained, clearly old. He set it on the table without explanation and stood there awkwardly, as if unsure what to say next. What is this? Emma asked. I found it when I was cleaning out my attic, Dr. Garrett said. It was Hannah's. She used to collect things, small trinkets and keepsakes. I thought maybe... He trailed off, then started again. There are some baby things in there. Clothes that Lily outgrew. A few toys. I thought Samuel might be able to use them. Emma opened the box carefully. Inside, she found tiny garments folded with care, soft from many washings, a wooden rattle painted with faded flowers, a pair of knitted booties in pale yellow, and at the bottom beneath everything else, a small carved wooden horse. At the bottom beneath everything else lay a small carved wooden horse. It reminded her of the one she had seen on the table when she first arrived at the cabin, the one that must have belonged to Ruth. But this one was different. The craftsmanship was finer, the details more delicate. Hannah carved that, Dr. Garrett said quietly. She made it for Lily when Lily was born. Said every child should have something made with love. Emma looked up at him, holding the wooden horse in her hands. I can't take this. It's too precious. Hannah would want it to be used. Dr. Garrett's voice was rough, as if the words cost him something. She would want it to bring joy to a child who needed it. Lily looked up from where she was playing with Samuel. Papa made me a new one, she announced, so Samuel can have the old one. It's called sharing. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, she said, and she meant it for more than just the gifts. Dr. Garrett nodded once curtly and turned toward the door. Then he paused, his hand on the frame. My wife, he said without looking back. Hannah. She was good at seeing people. Really seeing them, I mean. Not just what they showed the world, but who they really were underneath. He was quiet for a moment. She would have liked you, he said finally. I think she would have said you were exactly what that baby needed. He left before Emma could respond. But his words stayed with her long after he was gone, warming her in a way that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. The peace couldn't last, Emma knew that. She had learned long ago that happiness was always temporary, that every good thing came with a price, that the world had a way of taking back whatever it gave. But she hadn't expected the storm to arrive so soon. It was late afternoon on a day that had started like any other. Emma was at Henderson's General Store stocking shelves while Samuel napped in the back room. The bell above the door chimed, and she turned with her usual smile, ready to greet a customer. The smile died on her face. Standing in the doorway was a woman unlike anyone Emma had ever seen in Millbrook. She was tall and thin, with posture so perfect it seemed almost painful. Her dress was black, expensive, the kind of fabric that costs more than Emma would earn in a year. Her hair was dark pinned beneath a hat with delicate veil, and her eyes were blue. The same impossible blue as Samuel's, the same blue as the Colorado sky. But where Samuel's eyes were warm and trusting, this woman's eyes were cold, cold as mountain ice, cold as a winter that never ended. Behind her stood a man in a fine suit carrying a leather case that marked him as a lawyer. He looked at Emma the way one might look at an insect that had wandered into a place it didn't belong. The woman stepped forward, her boots clicking against the wooden floor. You are the one caring for my nephew, she said. It was not a question. Emma's heart stopped. Her hand still holding a can of beans began to tremble. Mrs. Ashford, she managed. Victoria Crawford Ashford inclined her head slightly, acknowledging her identity without deigning to confirm it. You know who I am. Good, that will save time. She looked around the store with an expression of barely concealed contempt, taking in the rough wooden shelves, the barrels of dry goods, the simple merchandise that was the lifeblood of this small mountain town. I have come for the child, Victoria said, turning back to Emma. My brother William was irresponsible in many things, but the boy carries Crawford blood. He belongs with his family. His real family. Emma found her voice, though it came out smaller than she wanted. With respect, Mrs. Ashford, Samuel has never met you. I'm the only mother he knows. Mother, Victoria's voice dripped with disdain. You are not his mother. You are a stranger who happened to be in the right place at the right time. A mail-order bride who arrived too late for a wedding that was never going to happen. The words stung, but Emma held her ground. I've cared for him for 3 weeks, fed him, held him when he cried, loved him when no one else would. Victoria's expression didn't change. How touching. But love, Miss Sullivan, does not confer legal rights. I have documents from the court in Boston establishing my claim as the boy's nearest living relative. I have resources that you cannot begin to imagine. And I have every intention of taking that child back to Boston where he belongs. She gestured to the lawyer, who stepped forward and opened his case, withdrawing a sheaf of official-looking papers. These documents, the lawyer said in a voice as smooth as oil, established Mrs. Ashford's legal standing to petition for guardianship of the minor child Samuel Crawford. We are prepared to file with the territorial court in Denver at the earliest opportunity. Emma's mind raced. She thought about what Dr. Garrett had told her. She thought about Frederick Hayes, the honest lawyer in Denver. She thought about everything she had to lose. Those documents are from Boston, she said, her voice steadier now. We're in Colorado territory. Boston courts have no jurisdiction here. Victoria's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. The lawyer looked uncomfortable. A technicality, Victoria said dismissively. One that will be remedied when I obtain the proper authorization from the territorial court. In the meantime, she stepped closer to Emma, close enough that Emma could smell her perfume, something expensive and floral that seemed wildly out of place in Henderson's general store. In the meantime, Victoria continued, her voice dropping to something almost intimate. I suggest you prepare yourself for the inevitable. I will have that child, Miss Sullivan. Whether it takes a week or a month or a year, we will have him. And there is nothing you can do to stop me. She turned and walked toward the door, the lawyer hurrying to follow. The stagecoach to Denver departs in 3 days, Victoria said over her shoulder. I expect to have this matter resolved before the month is out. Good day, Miss Sullivan. The bell chimed as the door closed behind her. Emma stood frozen among the shelves, still holding the can of beans, her whole body trembling. She had known this was coming. Dr. Garrett had warned her. But knowing and experiencing were two different things. Hearing Victoria's cold voice, seeing those ice-blue eyes, feeling the weight of all that wealth and power arrayed against her, it was terrifying. Mr. Henderson emerged from the back room, his face dark with anger. That woman, he growled. I told her she wasn't welcome in my store. Told her to take her Boston lawyers and go back where she came from. Emma turned to him, surprised. You know her? I know her type. Mr. Henderson spat on the floor, a gesture of contempt. Rich folks who think money makes them better than everyone else. Who think they can come into our town and take what they want. He looked at Emma with something approaching kindness. Don't you worry. This town looks after its own. That woman wants a fight. She'll get one. Emma wished she could share his confidence, but she had seen the look in Victoria's eyes. The absolute certainty. The cold determination. Victoria Crawford Ashford was not going to stop until she got what she wanted, and what she wanted was Samuel. That night, Emma sat in her rocking chair with Samuel in her arms, watching the fire burn low and trying not to cry. Everything she had built over the past 3 weeks, the routine, the friendships, the fragile sense of security, it all felt like it was crumbling around her. Victoria had money, Victoria had lawyers, Victoria had the full weight of the Crawford family name behind her. What did Emma have? A falling down cabin, a handful of friends, a job that barely paid enough to keep food on the table. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Samuel stirred in her arms, his blue eyes opening to look at her. He made a sound, not quite a cry, more like a question. Are you there? Are you still here? Emma held him closer. I'm here, she whispered. I'm not going anywhere. No matter what happens, I will fight for you. I will fight until there's nothing left to fight with. Samuel reached up and touched her cheek with his tiny hand. The gesture was so innocent, so trusting, that Emma felt something shift inside her. Not despair, not fear, something else. Determination. She had survived the orphanage. She had survived the factories. She had survived William Crawford's lies and the long journey to a town where no one knew her name. She would survive this too, because she was not fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for someone who depended on her. Someone who had no one else. Someone who deserved a chance at the love and family that Emma herself had never had. Victoria Crawford Ashford might have money and lawyers and all the power that came with being born into wealth. But Emma Sullivan had something Victoria didn't. She had a child who needed her, and that she decided would have to be enough. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains, carrying the promise of more snow. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the walls. And in Emma's arms, Samuel fell asleep to the sound of her heartbeat, trusting completely in the woman who had chosen to be his mother. The battle was coming, but tonight they were safe. Tonight they were together, and sometimes that was all that mattered. Emma didn't know that in a room at Millbrook's only boarding house, Victoria Crawford Ashford was writing a letter to her lawyers in Boston. She didn't know that Victoria had already begun gathering information about everyone in town, looking for weaknesses, looking for leverage. She didn't know that Victoria had learned about Dr. Elijah Garrett, about his dead wife and his young daughter, and his growing friendship with the mail-order bride who had stolen her nephew. She didn't know that Victoria was making plans, but she would find out soon enough. The storm was just beginning. Victoria Crawford Ashford did not wait 3 days for the stagecoach to Denver. She sent her lawyer Marcus Webb ahead with instructions to file the necessary paperwork immediately while she remained in Millbrook to pursue what she called a more direct approach. Emma learned this from Sheriff Daniel Cooper, who stopped by the cabin the morning after Victoria's arrival at Henderson's store. He stood on her porch with his hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable, in the way that men often did when they had bad news to deliver. "She's been asking questions all over town," the sheriff said. "About you, about the baby, about Dr. Garrett. She's been offering money for information." "Good money. Has anyone taken it?" Sheriff Cooper shook his head. "Not yet, but times are hard, Miss Sullivan. People have bills to pay and children to feed. I can't promise that'll hold forever." Emma thanked him for the warning and watched him walk back toward town, his boots leaving prints in the thin layer of snow that had fallen overnight. She held Samuel closer to her chest and tried to ignore the fear that was becoming her constant companion. The first official summons arrived 2 days later. A man Emma didn't recognize rode up to her cabin on a tired-looking horse and handed her an envelope sealed with red wax. Inside was a document covered in legal language that took her 3 readings to understand. Victoria Crawford Ashford was petitioning the territorial court in Denver for emergency custody of the minor child, Samuel Crawford, on the grounds that said child's current caretaker had no legal standing or blood relation to justify her continued guardianship. A hearing had been scheduled for 2 weeks hence. Emma sat down heavily in her rocking chair, the document trembling in her hands. 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks to prepare a defense against a woman who could buy and sell everyone in Millbrook without noticing the expense. Dr. Garrett arrived that evening with Frederick Hayes, the lawyer from Denver he had mentioned. Hayes was a man in his 50s with silver hair and spectacles that kept sliding down his nose. His suit was worn at the elbows and his shoes were scuffed, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that suggested he was not a man to be underestimated. "Tell me everything," Hayes said, settling into the chair Emma offered. "From the beginning. Don't leave anything out." So Emma told him. She told him about the letters from William Crawford, about the journey from Chicago, about arriving to find no one waiting. She told him about discovering Samuel in the wooden box, about Martha Hendricks and Dr. Garrett, about the weeks she had spent caring for a child who had become the center of her world. She told him about Victoria's arrival, about the cold blue eyes, about the threat that had been delivered with such casual certainty. Hayes listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small leather-bound book. When Emma finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You have a case," he said finally. "It's not a strong case, but it's a case. Colorado territorial law prioritizes the best interests of the child. If we can demonstrate that Samuel is thriving under your care, that you have community support, that removing him from your custody would cause harm, we have a chance." "What kind of chance?" Emma asked. Hayes removed his spectacles and cleaned them with a handkerchief. "Honest answer, maybe 30%. Victoria Crawford. Ashford has money connections and blood relation on her side, but she also has to prove that she would be a better guardian than you. And from what I understand, she hasn't spent more than a few hours in the same room as that child." He put his spectacles back on and looked at Samuel, who was sleeping peacefully in Emma's arms. "The law says blood matters," Hayes continued. "But judges are human. They can be persuaded. And a woman who abandoned her sick brother to his debts, who never visited when Ruth was dying or when the baby was born, who only appeared when there was something to claim, well, that's not a story that plays well in court." Emma felt a small spark of hope ignite in her chest. "So we have a chance. We have a chance," Hayes confirmed. "But we need to build it. We need witnesses who will testify to your character and your care of Samuel. We need documentation of his health improvements since you took over. We need to show the judge that you're not just some stranger who happened to find a baby. You're his mother in every way that matters." Dr. Garrett spoke for the first time since arriving. I can provide medical records showing Samuel's condition when Emma found him versus his condition now. The improvement is dramatic and well documented." Hayes nodded approvingly. "Good. That's exactly the kind of evidence we need." They talked for another hour, planning strategy and discussing contingencies. By the time Hayes and Dr. Garrett left, Emma felt something she hadn't felt since Victoria's arrival. Hope. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Emma continued working at Henderson's store, continued caring for Samuel, continued building the life she had started in Millbrook. But everything was shadowed now by the knowledge that it could all be taken away. Victoria remained in town, staying at the boarding house and making her presence felt in ways that were impossible to ignore. She attended church services, sitting in the front pew in her expensive black dress, making a show of putting money in the collection plate. She visited the sick and the elderly, bringing gifts and kind words that rang hollow to anyone who knew why she was really there. She was building her own case, Emma realized, presenting herself as a good Christian woman, a generous benefactor, someone the town should be grateful to have among them. It was a performance. Emma knew it was a performance. But she also knew that performances could be convincing, especially to people who wanted to believe. The supervised visits continued as ordered by the preliminary court ruling. 3 times a week, Victoria came to Emma's cabin with Sheriff Cooper standing watch and spent 2 hours with Samuel. The first few visits were awkward, Victoria holding the baby as if he might break, clearly uncertain how to interact with such a small creature. But as the days passed, something shifted. Emma noticed it gradually. The way Victoria's hands became steadier when she held Samuel. The way her voice softened when she spoke to him. The way she began to hum songs that sounded like lullabies, melodies from some distant memory. One afternoon, Emma returned from fetching water to find Victoria crying. It was not the dramatic sobbing that Emma might have expected from such a display. It was silent, almost invisible, just tears tracking down Victoria's carefully composed face as she held Samuel against her chest. The baby was awake, looking up at her with those blue eyes that they shared, and Victoria was looking back at him with an expression that Emma had never seen on her face before. Pain, raw and unguarded and devastating. Emma stood in the doorway, not knowing what to do. She had prepared herself for anger, for manipulation, for cold calculation. She had not prepared herself for this. Victoria noticed her presence and quickly wiped her eyes, but there was no hiding what Emma had witnessed. "He has the same eyes," Victoria said, her voice rough. "My son, Thomas. He had the same eyes." Emma set down her water pail and moved slowly into the room as if approaching a wounded animal. "Thomas was your son," she said carefully. Victoria nodded. "He would have been 5 years old this spring, if he had lived." The silence that followed was heavy with grief, old and deep, and never fully healed. "He died when he was 2. Victoria continued, still looking at Samuel. "Diphtheria. It came so fast. One day he was laughing and playing, and 3 days later..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Emma didn't know what to say. This was the woman who wanted to take Samuel away from her, who had threatened her with lawyers and money and power. But right now, holding a baby who reminded her of the child she had lost, Victoria Crawford, Ashford looked like nothing more than a grieving mother. "I'm sorry," Emma said, and meant it. Victoria looked up at her then, and for a moment the ice in her eyes melted. "I was at a charity dinner when he first became ill," Victoria said. "There was an important donor I needed to meet, a large sum of money at stake for the hospital I was supporting. I told myself it was just a cold, that the nurse could handle it, that I would check on him when I returned." She paused, her jaw tightening. "By the time I came home, the fever had taken hold. The doctor said if we had caught it earlier, if treatment had begun sooner." She shook her head. "Charles never forgave me. He said I had chosen my social obligations over our son. He said I had been too busy being important to notice that our child was dying." "Was he right?" Emma asked softly. Victoria's face hardened, but not with anger, with self-recrimination. "Yes," she said, "he was right. I wasn't there when Thomas needed me most. I wasn't there when he was calling for his mother in the night. I wasn't there when he died." She looked down at Samuel, who had fallen asleep against her chest. Victoria's eyes fell on the handkerchief tucked into Emma's pocket, the one with the embroidered R. She reached out and touched it gently. "Ruth made this," she said, her voice barely audible. "She was always skilled with a needle. I never met her, but William sent me a letter once asking for money. He mentioned she was pregnant. I refused to help." Victoria's jaw tightened. "Another thing I will never forgive myself for. I wear these gloves because of the scars," she said, pulling off the black leather to reveal her right hand. The skin was mottled and raised, the marks of old burns clearly visible. Thomas fell against the fireplace during one of his fever seizures. I pulled him out with my bare hands, but it was too late. It was already too late. Emma stared at the scars, understanding flooding through her. Victoria hadn't come to Millbrook to claim property or exercise power. She had come because she had lost a child and found out there was another one who might fill the void. It didn't excuse what she was doing. It didn't make it right, but it made it human. I never meant to become your enemy, Victoria said quietly. I just couldn't bear the thought of another child with Crawford blood being raised by strangers, being lost to me the way Thomas was lost. Emma sat down across from her, close enough to reach out and touch if she dared. Samuel isn't your second chance, Emma said gently. He's his own person with his own life ahead of him. You can't replace Thomas with him. It wouldn't be fair to either of them. Victoria's eyes glistened with fresh tears. I know that. But when I look at him, when I see those eyes, I feel like maybe God is giving me another opportunity, a chance to do it right this time. And taking him away from me, Emma asked. From the only mother he knows, would that be doing it right? Victoria didn't answer. She looked down at Samuel, sleeping peacefully in her arm, and Emma saw the conflict playing across her face. The desperate need warring with the unwilling acknowledgement that what she was doing might not be right. The moment stretched between them, fragile as glass. Then Sheriff Cooper cleared his throat from the doorway, announcing that the visit time was over and the moment shattered. Victoria handed Samuel back to Emma with hands that trembled slightly. She pulled on her gloves, covering the scars that marked her grief, and straightened her spine until she was once again the formidable woman who had first walked into Henderson's store. This doesn't change anything, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. The hearing will proceed as scheduled. I know, Emma replied. Victoria paused at the door. For what it's worth, you've done well with him. He's healthy, happy. I can see that you love him. I do, Emma said simply. Victoria nodded once and left without another word. Emma watched her ghost Samuel warm against her chest and wondered if she had just seen a crack in the armor or merely a more sophisticated form of manipulation. She hoped it was the former. She feared it might be the latter. The days before the hearing crawled by with agonizing slowness. Emma cared for Samuel, and met with Frederick Hayes to review testimony and strategy. She gathered letters of support from the people of Millbrook, handwritten testimonials from Martha Hendricks and Pastor Moore, and even gruff Mr. Henderson, all attesting to her character and her devotion to Samuel. Dr. Garrett prepared detailed medical records documenting every visit, every measurement, every improvement in Samuel's condition since Emma had taken over his care. The evidence painted a clear picture of a child who had been neglected and undernourished, now thriving under the attention of a woman who had made him her whole world. It should be enough, Hayes said during their final meeting before the hearing. But you need to understand, Miss Sullivan, in matters of custody, logic doesn't always prevail. Judges are human. They have biases and blind spots like anyone else. And Victoria Crawford Ashford is very, very good at playing to people's expectations. Emma understood. She had seen Victoria in church at the general store on the streets of Millbrook. She had watched her transform from an ice-cold aristocrat into a warm and generous visitor, all smiles and charitable gestures. It was a performance, but it was a convincing one. The night before the hearing, Emma couldn't sleep. She sat in her rocking chair with Samuel in her arms, watching the fire burn low and trying to imagine what tomorrow would bring. If she lost, Samuel would be taken to Boston. He would grow up in a mansion with servants and tutors surrounded by wealth that Emma couldn't begin to comprehend. He would have every material advantage, every opportunity. But he wouldn't have her, and she wouldn't have him. The thought was unbearable, physically painful like a knife twisting in her chest. Emma held Samuel closer and whispered promises into his soft hair, promises she wasn't sure she could keep. I won't let them take you. I will fight with everything I have. You are my son, and nothing will change that. Samuel stirred and opened his eyes, looking up at her with that trusting gaze that always undid her. Mama, she whispered, the word coming out before she could stop it. I'm your mama. Samuel reached up and touched her face with his small hand, and Emma felt tears streaming down her cheeks. She hadn't called herself that before. She hadn't dared. But it was true. It had been true from the moment she lifted him out of that wooden box and felt his tiny fingers curl around her own. She was his mother, and tomorrow she would prove it. A knock at the door made her heart leap into her throat. It was late, too late for visitors. She set Samuel in his cradle and crossed to the door with her heart pounding. Dr. Garrett stood on her porch snow, dusting his shoulders and his breath fogging in the cold air. "I saw your light on," he said. "I thought you might not be sleeping." Emma stepped aside to let him in, too tired to pretend she was fine. "The hearing is tomorrow," she said. "I keep thinking about everything that could go wrong." Dr. Garrett moved to the fire and added another log, taking his time before responding. When Hannah was dying, he said finally, "I made lists in my head. Lists of treatments I hadn't tried, specialists I hadn't consulted, prayers I hadn't offered. I thought if I could just think of the right thing, if I could just try harder, I could save her." He turned to face Emma, and she saw the old grief in his eyes, still raw despite the years. "I couldn't save her," he continued. "No matter how many lists I made, no matter how hard I tried. Some things are beyond our control." Emma felt her chest tighten. "Are you saying I should give up?" "No." Dr. Garrett shook his head firmly. "I'm saying that you've done everything you can do. The rest is in God's hands and the judge's hands. Worrying won't change the outcome. It will only steal your sleep and your strength." "Easy to say," Emma murmured. "I know, doctor." Garrett moved closer, close enough that Emma could see the firelight reflected in his gray eyes. "But I also know this. Whatever happens tomorrow, you won't face it alone. This town stands with you. I stand with you." Why? Emma asked the question she had been wanting to ask for weeks. "Why do you care so much about what happens to us?" Dr. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something she hadn't expected. "Because you remind me of her. Not your face or your voice, but the way you love, the way you fight for what matters. Hannah was like that. She would have walked through fire for Lily." He paused, his voice dropping. "And I think maybe watching you has reminded me that it's possible to feel something other than loss. That life can still hold good things even after everything falls apart." Emma didn't know what to say. The air between them felt charged heavy with words unspoken. Dr. Garrett stepped back, breaking the spell. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow you need to be strong." He left before she could respond, disappearing into the snow and the darkness. Emma stood at the door and watched him go, her heart full of emotions she couldn't name. Then she returned to her rocking chair, gathered Samuel into her arm, and finally fell asleep. The hearing was tomorrow, and whatever it brought, she would face it. She would face it for Samuel. She would face it for herself. And maybe, just maybe, she would face it for something else that was slowly, tentatively beginning to grow in her heart. The Denver courthouse was a stone building that seemed designed to intimidate. Its columns rose like sentinels guarding justice, and the steps leading to its entrance were worn smooth by decades of desperate footsteps. Emma climbed them with Samuel in her arms, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life. Frederick Hayes walked beside her, carrying a leather case full of documents and testimonials. Behind them came Dr. Garrett and Martha Hendricks, who had closed her house for the day to make the journey. Mr. Henderson had wanted to come too, but someone needed to mind the store, and he had pressed a silver dollar into Emma's hand, instead telling her it was for luck. The courtroom was paneled in dark wood with high windows that let in pale winter light. Rows of benches filled the gallery, and at the front sat a raised platform where Judge Harrison Blackwell would preside. He was already there when they entered, a man with a face like carved granite and eyes that revealed nothing. Victoria sat at the opposite table with Marcus Webb, her Boston lawyer. She wore a dress of deep burgundy today, expensive but not ostentatious, carefully chosen to project both wealth and restraint. Her hair was pinned perfectly, her posture flawless, her expression serene. She looked like a woman who had already won. The hearing began with opening statements. Marcus Webb spoke first, his voice smooth and practiced. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of family. Mrs. Victoria Crawford Ashford is the only living blood relative of the minor child Samuel Crawford. She has the means, the education, and the desire to provide this child with every advantage in life. The woman currently holding the child is a stranger, a mail-order bride who arrived after her intended husband had already fled. She has no legal standing, no blood connection, and no resources to offer. The law is clear. Family must come first." Frederick Hayes rose to respond, his voice quieter but no less compelling. "Your Honor, the law does indeed prioritize family. But what makes a family? Is it simply blood, or is it something more? Miss Emma Sullivan found Samuel Crawford abandoned and starving in a cabin. She took him in when no one else would. She has fed him, sheltered him, loved him. Under her care, he has transformed from a malnourished infant into a thriving child. Mrs. Ashford may share his blood, but Miss Sullivan has earned something more precious. She has earned his trust. The judge listened without expression, making occasional notes. The morning proceeded with testimony. Martha Hendricks spoke about finding Emma at the cabin, about the conditions Samuel had been in, about the devotion she had witnessed over the following weeks. Pastor Moore testified to Emma's character, her attendance at church, her integration into the community. Mr. Henderson had sent a written statement praising her work ethic and her determination. Then Dr. Garrett took the stand. He presented his medical records with clinical precision, documenting Samuel's weight gain, his improved color, his developmental milestones. But when the lawyer asked him to describe Emma's care in his own words, something changed in his voice. "I have been a physician for 12 years, he said. I have seen many children in many circumstances. I have seen neglect and I have seen love. What Miss Sullivan has given that child is love. Pure, unconditional, sacrificial love. She has nothing to offer him except herself, and she has offered that completely." He paused, and Emma saw him look directly at the judge. "I lost my wife 2 years ago. I know what it means to love someone so much that their absence feels like a physical wound. I see that same love in Miss Sullivan every time she holds that baby. It is not a love that can be bought or manufactured. It is the love of a mother for her child." Victoria's lawyer objected, arguing that Dr. Garrett's emotional testimony was irrelevant to the legal question at hand. The judge sustained the objection, but made a note, and Emma dared to hope that the words had landed. The afternoon brought Victoria to the stand. She was composed and articulate, speaking of her desire to provide Samuel with the best possible life. She spoke of the schools she would send him, to the opportunities she could offer, the stability of her home in Boston. She did not mention Thomas Jr. She did not mention her guilt or her grief. She presented herself as a woman of means and virtue, motivated purely by family obligation. But Frederick Hayes was not finished. "Mrs. Ashford," he said during cross-examination, "when did you first learn of Samuel's existence?" Victoria's composure flickered almost imperceptibly. "After my brother fled, my investigators informed me. And before that, before William abandoned the child, were you aware that he had a son? I was not in regular contact with my brother." Hayes nodded. "So you were not present when Samuel was born. You did not attend his mother Ruth's funeral. You made no effort to contact William or offer assistance during the months he struggled to care for an infant alone." "I did not know," Victoria said, but her voice had lost some of its smoothness. "You did not know because you chose not to know." Hayes pressed. "Your brother was a documented swindler who defrauded multiple women. He accumulated debts throughout this territory. His troubles were hardly secret, yet you made no effort to intervene, no effort to help until there was something you wanted to claim." "Objection," Webb interjected. "Counsel is badgering the witness." "Sustained." The judge's voice was flat. "Move on, Mr. Hayes." Hayes changed tactics. "Mrs. Ashford, can you describe your experience caring for infants?" Victoria hesitated. "I had a nurse for my son when he was young." "A nurse. So you did not personally attend to his daily needs. That was not customary in my household. And since your son's death, have you had any experience with children? Any at all?" The question hung in the air. Victoria's face tightened. "I have not." Hayes let the silence stretch before continuing. "So you are asking this court to remove a child from the care of a woman who has devoted every moment of the past month to his well-being and place him instead with a woman who has no practical experience with infants and who has never met this child before arriving in Millbrook 2 weeks ago." "Blood relation," Webb interrupted, rising from his seat. "Mrs. Ashford is the child's aunt. That is the relevant factor." The judge raised his hand for silence. "I will determine what is relevant, Mr. Webb." The hearing continued until the light through the windows had faded to gray. By the time Judge Blackwell called a recess announcing that he would deliver his decision the following morning, Emma was exhausted in ways she hadn't known were possible. She sat on a bench outside the courtroom holding Samuel against her chest, too drained even to cry. The baby was fussy from the long day, and she rocked him automatically, her mind blank with worry. "Doctor." Garrett sat down beside her without speaking. Martha Hendricks brought her a cup of water, and squeezed her shoulder before heading to find lodging for the night. "I don't know what happens now," Emma whispered. "Neither do I," Dr. Garrett admitted. "But you did everything you could. The rest is out of our hands. That's what terrifies me." They sat in silence as the courthouse emptied around them. Through the window, Emma could see Victoria climbing into an expensive carriage, her lawyer following close behind. She didn't look back at the courthouse. She didn't look at Emma at all. "She doesn't see me as a person," Emma realized. "Just an obstacle to be removed." The night passed slowly in the small boarding house where they had found rooms. Emma lay awake with Samuel beside her, listening to his soft breathing and trying to imagine a future without him. She couldn't. Every time she tried, her mind went blank, refusing to accept the possibility. This child had become her whole world in the space of a month. He had given her purpose when she had none hope, when she had forgotten what hope felt like. He had made her a mother not through biology, but through choice, through the daily act of showing up and caring and loving, even when it was hard. If she lost him tomorrow, what would be left? Sleep finally came in the small hours before dawn, fitful and filled with dreams she wouldn't remember. When she woke, gray light was seeping through the window, and Samuel was stirring beside her, ready for his morning feeding. She went through the motions automatically. Warm the milk, feed the baby, change his clothes, hold him close. The routine that had become her anchor, the small acts of care that had taught her what it meant to put someone else first. Today, it might all end. The courthouse was crowded when they arrived, word of the case having spread through Denver. People Emma didn't know filled the gallery, some sympathetics, others merely curious. She kept her eyes forward, focused on the judge's empty bench, trying not to think about what was coming. Judge Blackwell entered precisely at 9 o'clock. His face was as unreadable as it had been the day before, and Emma searched it desperately for some hint of his decision. She found nothing. "This court has considered the matter of custody regarding the minor child, Samuel Crawford," the judge began. "We have heard testimony from both parties and examined the evidence presented." Emma's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear his words. "The question before this court is not simply one of blood relation or financial means. It is a question of what serves the best interests of the child. The law recognizes that children require stability, care, and love. The law also recognizes that these things can come from sources beyond biological family." Emma held her breath. However, the judge continued, and Emma felt her stomach drop at the word. "The law also places significant weight on blood relation, particularly when the alternative guardian has no legal standing or formal connection to the child." She felt tears building behind her eyes. "Therefore, this court rules." He paused, and in that pause, chaos erupted. The doors at the back of the courtroom burst open, and a man Emma didn't recognize came running down the aisle, shouting words that didn't make sense at first. "Fire, fire at the schoolhouse. The children are trapped." For a moment, no one moved. Then everyone moved at once. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, but it was useless. People were streaming toward the doors, their faces pale with fear. Through the windows, Emma could see smoke rising in the distance, a dark column against the gray sky. She looked at Dr. Garrett, then at Victoria, then at the chaos unfolding around her. And she made a decision. "Take Samuel," she said, pressing the baby into Martha's arms. "Keep him safe." Then she ran. The schoolhouse was fully engulfed by the time Emma arrived. Flames climbed the walls and licked at the roof, sending sparks spiraling into the winter sky. A crowd had gathered, forming a desperate bucket line from the nearest well, but it was clear that no amount of water would save the building now. Emma pushed through the crowd, searching for information. Who was inside? Had everyone gotten out? 3 children, someone shouted. They were in the back room when the fire started. The door is blocked. Emma didn't think. She ran toward the burning building, ignoring the hands that tried to hold her back. The heat hit her like a physical force and smoke stung her eyes, but she kept moving. Those were children in there. Someone's children. Children who needed help. She reached the side of the building where flames had not yet taken full hold. A window was there, the glass already cracked from heat. She looked around for something to break it with. A hand appeared beside her, holding a heavy stone. Victoria Crawford Ashford, her expensive dress already smudged with ash, her face set with determination. Together, Victoria said. They struck the window simultaneously. The glass shattered inward, and smoke billowed out thick and choking. Emma pulled her shawl over her nose and mouth and climbed through Victoria close behind. The inside was a nightmare of heat and smoke. Emma dropped to her hands and knees where the air was clearer and crawled forward, calling out for the children. Behind her, she could hear Victoria coughing, struggling to breathe. Here, a small voice, terrified but alive. "We're here." Emma followed the sound and found them huddled under a heavy wooden table. Three children, their faces streaked with soot and tears. And among them, golden curls matted with ash, was Lily Garrett. Emma's heart nearly stopped. Lily, Elijah's daughter, the child who had called Samuel her brother, the child who had brought laughter and light into Emma's lonely cabin. "It's getting to be all right," Emma said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "We're going to get you out." She grabbed the nearest child, a boy of about 6, and pushed him toward the window. Victoria was there, reaching through to pull him to safety. The second child, a girl slightly older, followed. Lily clung to Emma's arm, too frightened to move. "I've got you," Emma said. "I won't let go. I promise." She lifted Lily and carried her toward the window, the heat pressing against her back, the roar of flames growing louder. Her lungs burned, her eyes streamed, but she kept moving. Victoria's hands appeared through the window, reaching for Lily. "Take her," Emma gasped. "Take her now." Victoria pulled Lily through to safety just as a beam crashed down behind Emma, showering her with sparks. She felt Victoria's hands grab her arms, pulling her through the window frame, and then she was falling, tumbling onto the cold ground outside, gasping for clean air. For a long moment, she couldn't move. She lay on her back, staring up at the smoke-filled sky, her chest heaving, her whole body trembling. She could hear voices around her, shouts and cries, and the crackle of flames, but it all seemed very far away. Then a face appeared above her. Dr. Garrett, his eyes wild with fear and relief. "Lily," Emma managed. "Is she? She's safe," his voice cracked. "You saved her. You saved my daughter." He pulled Emma into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. She could feel him shaking, could feel the desperate gratitude in his embrace. She held on and let herself be held, too exhausted to do anything else. When she finally pulled back, she saw Victoria sitting nearby on the frozen ground. The elegant Boston widow was barely recognizable. Her dress was ruined, her hair had come loose from its pins, her face was black with soot. But she was holding Lily's hand, checking the child for injuries, murmuring words of comfort. Their eyes met across the space between them. "You came," Emma said. "You helped." Victoria looked at her for a long moment. Then she said something Emma hadn't expected. "You didn't hesitate. You ran into a burning building for children you'd never met." Her voice was rough, stripped of its usual polish. "That's what a mother does." Emma didn't know how to respond. Victoria stood slowly, wincing at some injury Emma couldn't see. She walked over and had knelt beside Emma, her blue eyes bright with tears and firelight. "I was wrong," Victoria said. "I came here thinking that blood was what mattered, that money and position and family name would make me the right choice for Samuel. But you—" She shook her head. "You are what he needs. You are his mother." The words hit Emma like a wave, washing away weeks of fear and uncertainty. "I won't fight you anymore," Victoria continued. "I'll withdraw my petition. Samuel belongs with you." Emma stared at her, not daring to believe. "But what about I still want to be part of his life?" Victoria interrupted. "Not as someone trying to take him away. As family, real family. An aunt who visits and sends gifts and watches him grow up knowing he's loved." She reached out and took Emma's hand, the gesture awkward but sincere. "I lost my son because I wasn't there when he needed me. I won't make that mistake again. But I've realized that being there doesn't mean controlling everything. Sometimes it means stepping back and trusting someone else to do what you can't." Emma felt tears streaming down her face, cutting tracks through the soot on her cheeks. She squeezed Victoria's hand. "You're welcome," Emma said. "You're always welcome." Around them, the fire was being brought under control. The schoolhouse was lost, but no lives had been taken. The children Emma and Victoria had rescued were being tended by their frantic parents. Lily was in her father's arms, clinging to his neck and crying with relief. And somewhere in the crowd, Martha Hendricks was holding Samuel, keeping him safe, just as Emma had asked. It was over. Not just the fire, but the battle. Emma had won. The formal withdrawal of Victoria's petition happened 3 days later in Judge Blackwell's courtroom. Victoria stood before the bench in a simple gray dress, her hands no longer gloved, the scars visible for anyone to see. "Your Honor," she said, "I wish to withdraw my petition for custody of the minor child Samuel Crawford. I have come to believe that the child's current guardian, Miss Emma Sullivan, is the right person to raise him. I ask only that I be permitted to remain part of his life as his aunt. The judge studied her for a long moment. You're certain, Mrs. Ashford? I am certain. Judge Blackwell turned to Emma. And you, Miss Sullivan, do you consent to Mrs. Ashford maintaining a relationship with the child? Emma looked at Victoria, at the woman who had come to Millbrook as an enemy and was leaving as something like a friend. I do, she said. Family isn't just blood. It's choosing to love someone and showing up for them. Victoria has shown that she can do that. The judge nodded slowly. Then this court recognizes Miss Emma Sullivan as the legal guardian of Samuel Crawford. The petition for custody change is dismissed. He banged his gavel. This matter is concluded. Emma closed her eyes and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for weeks. It was done. Samuel was hers. The months that followed brought changes that Emma could never have predicted. Victoria didn't return to Boston. She purchased a small house in Millbrook, a modest place by her standards, but comfortable and warm. She came to visit Emma and Samuel nearly every day, not to interfere or control, but simply to be present. She learned to change diapers and warm bottles and sing lullabies that made Samuel gurgle with delight. She also used her wealth for good. She funded the rebuilding of the schoolhouse, this time in brick that would resist fire. She established a scholarship fund for children whose families couldn't afford books and supplies. She donated to Dr. Garrett's clinic, allowing him to purchase equipment he'd only dreamed of having. The ice in her eyes melted, gradually replaced by something warmer. She smiled more. She laughed sometimes. She began to heal. Emma continued working at Henderson's store, though Mr. Henderson had given her a raise and reduced her hours so she could spend more time with Samuel. The cabin that had seemed so broken when she first arrived had been repaired and expanded with help from neighbors who no longer saw her as a stranger but as one of their own. And then there was Elijah. Their relationship progressed slowly, as was right. They had both been wounded by loss, both learned to guard their hearts. But something was growing between them, something neither could deny. It started with small things, the way he looked at her across the room, the way his hand lingered when he passed her a cup of coffee, the way Lily had started calling her Miss Emma Mama without anyone correcting her. 6 months after the fire, on a spring evening, when the mountains were turning green and wildflowers dotted the meadows, Elijah Garrett knocked on Emma's door with a bunch of wildflowers in his hand. I'm not good at this, he said when she opened the door. I'm a doctor. I know how to set bones and deliver babies and stitch wounds. I don't know how to say what I'm feeling. Emma took the flowers and waited. My wife died 2 years ago. Elijah continued. I thought that was the end of it for me. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone except for Lily, and that would have to be enough. He paused, gathering himself. Then you came. You arrived on that stagecoach with nothing but a broken promise and a bag full of dreams, and you found a baby who needed you, and you chose to stay. You chose to fight. You chose to love when loving was hard and terrifying and might not have worked out. Emma felt tears building in her eyes. I'm not asking you to marry me, Elijah said. Not yet. It's too soon for both of us. But I'm asking if you would let me, if you would allow me to be part of your life, to walk beside you, to see where this goes. Emma set down the flowers and took his hands in hers. I would like that, she said. I would like that very much. He smiled, then a real smile that transformed his serious face into something beautiful. And Emma thought that maybe, just maybe, everything she had suffered had been leading her to this moment. This man, this life, this family she had built from nothing. The wedding happened a year later in the little white church where Emma had sat so many Sundays praying for strength and guidance and hope. She wore a dress sewn by the women of Millbrook, simple white cotton, with lace at the collar, that Mrs. Henderson had donated from her own wedding gown. Her hair was pinned up with wildflowers, and she carried a bouquet picked by Lily from the meadow behind their house. Elijah waited for her at the altar, handsome in his best suit, his gray eyes shining with a joy she had never seen there before. Beside him stood Samuel, now nearly 2 years old, holding a small pillow with the rings tied to it. He didn't understand what was happening, but he grinned when he saw Emma reaching out his arms to her. Mama, he said the word clear and sure. It was the first time he had said it in front of everyone, and Emma felt her heart overflow. The ceremony was brief and beautiful. Pastor Moore spoke of love and commitment, and the mysterious ways that God brought people together. He spoke of families formed not by blood, but by choice. And Emma thought of Victoria sitting in the front pew, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, finally at peace with the life she had found in this small mountain town. Do you take this woman to be your wife? I do. Do you take this man to be your husband? I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Elijah kissed her, and the church erupted in applause. Lily threw flower petals in the air. Samuel clapped his hands without knowing why, and Emma held on to her husband and thought about the letter that had brought her here, the letter full of lies and false promises that had led her to everything she had ever wanted. She had come to Millbrook expecting a husband and found betrayal, but she had also found a son, a daughter, a community, a purpose, and now a love she had never dared to dream of. The reception was held in the meadow behind the church with tables set up under the cottonwood trees and food brought by every family in town. There was music, someone playing a fiddle while others clapped along. There was laughter and dancing and the kind of joy that comes from a community celebrating one of its own. Emma danced with her husband under the Colorado sky, their children playing nearby, their friends and neighbors surrounding them with warmth. She thought about the orphanage in Chicago, about the cold beds and thin soup and endless waiting for a family that never came. She thought about the factory, about the 14-hour days and the cotton dust in her lungs, and the desperate hope that had made her answer a stranger's advertisement. All of it had led here, to this moment, this man, this life. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Emma found herself standing apart from the celebration for just a moment. Samuel was in her arms, his head resting on her shoulder, finally tired out from all the excitement. Lily was holding Elijah's hand, chattering about the cake she wanted to eat. Victoria was helping Martha Hendricks clear some of the dishes, the two women who had once been so different, now working together like old friends. This is my family, Emma thought. Not the one I was born into, not the one I expected to find, but the one I chose, the one that chose me. Elijah appeared beside her, wrapping his arm around her waist. What are you thinking about, Mrs. Garrett? The name made her smile. I'm thinking about how strange life is, how the worst thing that ever happened to me led to the best thing, being abandoned by William Crawford. Emma nodded. If he had been here waiting for me, I never would have found Samuel. I never would have stayed in Millbrook. I never would have met you. Elijah pulled her closer. Then I suppose I owe him a debt of gratitude. Though I'd still punch him if I ever saw him. Emma laughed, the sound carrying across the meadow like music. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the children were sleeping, Emma sat on the porch of their home and looked up at the stars. More stars than she had ever seen in Chicago. More stars than she had known existed. Elijah sat beside her, his hand holding hers. Are you happy? He asked. Emma considered the question. She thought about everything she had lost and everything she had gained. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain and the fear and the moments when she had wanted to give up. And she thought about Samuel sleeping inside the child who had changed everything. The child who had taught her what it meant to love someone more than herself. Yes, she said finally, I'm happy. I didn't know it was possible to be this happy. Elijah squeezed her hand. Neither did I. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, feeling the cool mountain air on their faces. And Emma thought about the letter that had started it all, the letter that had promised her a new life and delivered something entirely different. The letter had lied about almost everything, but it had led her home. And home, she had learned, was not a place. It was the people you loved and the people who loved you back. It was showing up every day, doing the hard work of caring and forgiving and trying again. It was choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. Home was what you built when you had nothing else. Emma had built a home, a family, a life. On the wall of their new home, in a simple wooden frame, hung Lily's drawing from that day long ago. 5 figures, now 6, with the newest addition to their family growing in Emma's belly. The drawing that had predicted their future before any of them knew it was possible. And as she sat on her porch with her husband beside her and her children sleeping safely inside, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them. Because she was Emma Sullivan Garrett. She was a mother and a wife and a member of this community, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. The girl who arrived on a stagecoach with nothing but a broken promise had become a woman with everything that mattered. She had not been saved. She had been chosen. And she had chosen back. That was the truth of her story. That was the meaning of home. That was the gift of the letter that led her here to this life, to this love, to this moment under the endless Colorado sky.